Welcome to The Inner Shift. I'm Dr. Emily Bruce, and on this channel, we explore the patterns, conditioning, and experiences that shape how we relate to ourselves, others, and the world around us through the lens of behavior science, awareness, and transformation. And in today's video, I want to talk about how many of us only know how to relate to difficult relationships from extremes. We either completely collapse into self-erasure or we move toward emotional annihilation. So what does this mean? Self-erasure is when we abandon ourselves in order to preserve connection, approval, peace, or love, meaning we either overgive, overexplain, overfunction, rescue, people please, and abandon ourselves to keep the connection. It does look like the people pleasing, suppressing feelings, saying yes when we mean no, tolerating behavior that hurts us, constantly trying to understand everyone else while ignoring ourselves, taking emotional responsibility for other people, or overgiving in hopes of receiving love or validation. A person in self-erasure often believes if I just do enough, understand enough, help enough, or stay quiet enough, maybe the relationship will finally feel safe. The problem is that over time, the self slowly disappears from the relationship. Emotional annihilation, on the other hand, is the opposite extreme. It's when the nervous system becomes so overwhelmed, resentful, hurt, or emotionally flooded that it swings into, I'm done, cut them off, burn it all down, I never want to speak to them again. It can look like rage, impulsive reactions, shutting down completely, emotional detachment, harsh boundaries created from pain rather than clarity, or wanting to destroy the connection because staying regulated feels impossible. Self-erasure says, I'll abandon myself to keep the connection. Emotional annihilation says, I'll destroy the connection so that I don't feel abandoned again. And honestly, many people bounce between self-erasure and emotional annihilation for years. They overgive until resentment builds. Then they explode or disappear. Then guilt pulls them back into overgiving again. And the cycle is exhausting. I think a lot of people live their lives, their entire lives, bouncing between these two states without ever learning how to exist somewhere in the middle. Many of us don't become aware of these patterns until a relationship becomes emotionally activating. Part of us wants to overgive, explain, overexplain, rescue, or preserve the connection at all costs. Another part of us wants to shut down, disconnect, disappear, or burn it all down. And what becomes important to notice is this. These responses feel automatic because they are practiced. They have been learned over time, over and over and over again, reinforced through repeated experiences, and that is how they became emotionally fluent. So when we realize that these patterns are automatic, we can also understand that neither response, either self-erasure or emotional annihilation, is actually grounded, meaning they will never allow for emotional regulation or effective communication. And what I realized is that somewhere in the middle between these two extremes was a question that I had never really asked before. Because maybe the goal isn't, how do I keep the peace at the expense of myself? And the goal also isn't, how do I destroy the relationship because I feel overwhelmed? The middle ground asks a different question. What level of connection allows me to remain emotionally honest and regulated? That may mean less access to you, right? Slower responses, clearer boundaries, no longer rescuing, no more over-explaining, staying compassionate without self-abandonment. And for many people, the middle ground initially feels uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. Many of us were taught extremes, but never taught emotional flexibility. So maybe the real work is learning how to stay connected to ourselves while deciding what level of connection to others feels emotionally safe, honest, and sustainable. And that will be challenging at first because many of us were never taught healthy middle ground behaviors. We learned extremes: overfunctioning, caretaking, suppressing, resenting, exploding, withdrawing, or cutting people off completely. But emotional flexibility lives somewhere in the middle. And this is where I think the real inner shift and/or personality identity change begins, because so much of what we call identity or personality is actually deeply practiced patterns. Our identity or personality characteristics do not have to remain fixed forever. And this does include patterns of relating, patterns of protecting, patterns of surviving. If somebody spends years people-pleasing, rescuing, over-explaining, or taking emotional responsibility for everyone around them, those responses will feel like, that is who I am. They feel like an identity. But if you don't want these patterns to be part of your identity, just remember that practice patterns can be practiced differently. And that means we can begin building new responses intentionally. We can pause before we react. We can ask, what response allows me to remain regulated? What boundary protects my peace without abandoning my values? What level of connection feels honest for me right now? How can I proceed without causing harm to myself or someone else? And then we practice that response. Even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when part of us wants to go back to the old patterns because they feel emotionally fluent. That's the work. Not becoming cold, not becoming avoidant, not becoming endlessly self-sacrificing, but learning to remain connected to ourselves while reinforcing new responses and navigating those difficult or challenging relationships. I do have a caveat that I do want to mention. And that is that when we begin changing, something else uncomfortable can happen. Our relationship with others changes too. Sometimes other people welcome healthier patterns, and sometimes they resist them. Sometimes boundaries reveal what the relationship was able to tolerate all along. Because one of the hardest parts about changing patterns is realizing that not everyone benefits from your healing or from you becoming more self-aware. And both of those changes are so that you can navigate the world in a healthier manner. Some people became comfortable with the version of you that overgave, overexplained, rescued, or abandoned themselves to preserve the relationship. And when you begin changing those patterns, the relationship dynamic changes too. Sometimes people resist your boundaries, not because the boundaries are wrong, but because the relationship was unintentionally built around your lack of them. And that can be painful, because many people unconsciously believe, if I finally communicate, clearly set boundaries, and show up differently, the relationship will automatically become healthier. And if someone rejects your boundaries, misunderstands them, punishes you for them, or distances themselves because you no longer overfunction for them, that can activate old wounds very quickly. The nervous system may immediately want to go back to people-pleasing, rescuing, over-explaining, or self-erasure, simply to reduce the discomfort of potential disconnection. But discomfort does not automatically mean the boundary is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is simply the nervous system learning a new way of relating. And this is why awareness matters so much, because if we are not conscious, we will often mistake familiarity for health. And we will return to old patterns not because they're good for us, but because they are emotionally practiced and predictable. The work is learning how to stay connected to ourselves long enough for the pattern to become emotionally fluent, because new patterns rarely feel natural at first. Familiar patterns feel emotionally fluent because we've practiced them. So just remember, new ways of responding often feel awkward, uncomfortable, and unfamiliar. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It may simply mean that your nervous system is learning something new. Allow for yourself to get it wrong, or return to those old patterns. Give yourself grace through the process. But remember that repeatedly practicing the new responses is how they become automatic and fluent. And also, this is important. Something else often happens during this process. Emotions that we've avoided may begin surfacing. That could be grief, sadness, exhaustion, anger. And sometimes anger surfaces because we are finally allowing ourselves to feel the full impact of what a relationship has cost us emotionally. That doesn't mean that we need to burn everything down, but it also doesn't mean we should abandon ourselves to preserve the connection. Maybe there's another option. Maybe we can create boundaries without hatred. Maybe we can step back without revenge. Maybe we can love someone and still stop overfunctioning for them. And if those boundaries are not accepted by other people, which may hurt, right? We still don't have to return to self-erasure just to keep the relationship, or to emotional annihilation to feel regulated. I think many of us are trying to learn this process in real time. How to stop abandoning ourselves without abandoning our humanity too. And maybe that's part of the inner shift. So before you leave this video, I want to invite you into a brief moment of reflection. Take a moment to pause. Take a slow breath in through your nose and exhale through the mouth. One more time, and if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. Breathe in and exhale. Now bring to mind a relationship or situation that feels emotionally activating for you. Someone where you notice yourself moving toward extremes. Maybe part of you wants to overgive, fix, rescue, explain, or keep the peace at your own expense. Or maybe another part of you wants to completely shut down, disconnect, explode, or walk away forever. Just notice the pull toward the extremes. No judgment, just awareness. And now ask yourself, what does self-erasure look like for me in this situation? Maybe it's saying yes when you mean no. Maybe it's over-explaining. Maybe it's taking responsibility for someone else's emotions. Keeping the connection while slowly abandoning yourself. And now ask, what does emotional annihilation look like for me? Maybe it's wanting to end the relationship, shut off emotionally, say something hurtful, or disconnect completely because the pain feels too overwhelming. Just notice both responses. And now, without forcing yourself into either extreme, ask yourself a different question. What level of connection allows me to remain emotionally honest and regulated? Not perfect, not spiritually superior, not endlessly self-sacrificing, just honest and regulated. And maybe the answer is less access, slower responses, clearer boundaries, more space, or simply no longer overfunctioning. And maybe that middle ground response feels unfamiliar, and that's okay. New responses often feel uncomfortable before they feel natural. So take another slow breath in and exhale. And as you move through your week, maybe practice pausing before reacting automatically. Not asking, how do I win? How do I keep the peace? Or how do I destroy the connection? But instead asking, what response allows me to stay connected to myself? And maybe that's where the inner shift begins.